I am 75 years old, and I need you to hear what I'm about to say, because I spent most of my life not hearing it, not from anyone, not from the financial advisors, not from my employer, not from the friends who sat next to me in those long corporate meetings while we all nodded and pretended we had it figured out. Here is the truth, the hard, unglamorous truth that nobody puts on a financial planning brochure. According to the Federal Reserve's most recent survey of consumer finances, the median retirement savings for Americans between 65 and 74 is just over $200,000. That sounds like a lot until you do the math, until you realize what Medicare doesn't cover, until you realize what Social Security actually pays out when you strip away the hope and do the arithmetic. Most people are, quietly, running out of time and money at exactly the same moment. But here's the thing. The ones who aren't, the ones who genuinely crossed into financial freedom after 65, they didn't do it by being smarter investors at 40. They did it by making one decision, one specific, counterintuitive decision that most people never make because they're still waiting, still deferring, still telling themselves the timing isn't right. I know that trap better than almost anyone alive. I'm not here to sell you a course. I'm not here to pitch a program or hand you a 7-step framework. I'm sitting here at 75, talking to you, woman to woman, because if you found this video, something in you already knows something is off. Something is calling you to pay attention differently. And I need you to stay with me through this, because what I'm going to share with you changed the final chapter of my life, and it can still change yours. For 40 years, from the time I was 25 years old until I retired at 65, I was the woman who did everything right. I mean everything. I maxed out my 401k contributions every single year. I diversified my portfolio the way the book said to. I worked the long hours, took the promotions, made the sacrifices. I missed my daughter's school plays because of quarterly reviews. I skipped family vacations because of deadlines. I stayed late in offices with bad fluorescent lighting, eating bad vending machine sandwiches, telling myself it was all building toward something, toward the life I was going to live later. That word, later. I want you to really feel that word for a second. Later. It is the most dangerous word in the English language, and we use it like it's free. I had a plan. My financial advisor, a very confident man in a very nice suit, with a very tidy desk in a very expensive part of the city, had laid it all out for me. By the time I turned 65, I would have a nest egg well over $1 million. My Social Security would kick in. My Medicare would cover my health expenses. I would have the house mostly paid off. I would have the trips I'd deferred. I would have, finally, the time. And you know what happened? I got exactly that. I did. The numbers were almost precisely what he projected. I retired at 65 on a bright September morning. My colleagues threw a little party. Someone brought a sheet cake with "Bon voyage, Margaret," written in blue frosting. I drove home in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon for the first time in 40 years, and I sat in my kitchen and I thought, okay, now it begins. But it didn't begin, not the way I expected. I'm not proud of this. It took me years to say this out loud. But the first year of my retirement was one of the most disorienting years of my life. I had structured my entire identity around being productive, around being needed, around having a calendar full of obligations that told me who I was and where I belonged. And suddenly, nothing. A Tuesday with nothing in it. A Wednesday with nothing in it. I kept waiting to feel free. I kept waiting for the exhale, for the lightness I had imagined for 4 decades. It didn't come. Instead, something strange happened. I started being very careful with the money. Very careful. Even though the number in my accounts was more than I had ever imagined having, I was afraid to spend it. I'd built my sense of security around accumulating it, and now spending it felt like dismantling the only safe structure I had left. So I deferred again. I deferred the trip to Portugal I'd always wanted. I deferred joining the painting class. I deferred calling the old friend I hadn't spoken to in years because I wanted to wait until I had something interesting to report. Does that sound familiar? Are you hearing yourself in any of this? That first year became a second year, and then a third. The trip stayed on the list. The class stayed unjoined. The money sat there, doing what money does when you're afraid of it. It sat there, and time moved without it. And here is where it gets harder to talk about. I want you to understand something about the body that nobody tells you when you're 45 and making 5-year financial plans. The body does not wait for your portfolio to perform. The body does not care about your target retirement date or your withdrawal strategy or your bucket system. The body just keeps aging, quietly, consistently, without asking your permission. By the time I was 68, my knees were a problem. Not a tragedy, just a problem. But that hike in Patagonia I'd been talking about since I was 45, I started doing the math in my head differently. Maybe wait until I feel a little better. Maybe next year when the inflammation is down. Maybe the summer after that. By 69, I had acid reflux that made long flights genuinely miserable. By 70, my sleep was broken and strange in ways it hadn't been before. None of this was dramatic. None of it was a diagnosis that stopped me cold. It was just the slow, quiet accumulation of a body that had been asked to wait for decades and was now, very politely, presenting its invoice. I'm not saying this to frighten you. I'm saying this because I wish someone had said it to me. Not in a morbid way, in a loving way, in the way a true friend would lean across a table and say, "Honey, your window is not infinite, and it is moving faster than you think." The thing about deferring your life is that it feels responsible. It feels like the mature, disciplined choice, and in some contexts it absolutely is. I am not telling you to throw your savings out the window and act reckless. That's not the lesson. The lesson is more subtle and I think more important. Somewhere along the way, I confuse the accumulation of resources with the accumulation of living, and those are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. I had the resources. I had more resources than my parents ever dreamed of having, but I had spent so long building the vessel that I had forgotten to ask what I was filling it with. And when I finally sat still long enough to look, I mean really look, without the noise of the office and the busyness of the schedule drowning everything out, I saw that the vessel was mostly full of deferred moments, of almost conversations, of trips described to other people but never taken by me. That was the moment, the real one. Not the health scare itself, though I'll get to that, but this quieter moment, this awful Tuesday morning when I was 69 years old, sitting in that same kitchen, looking at a list in my journal of things I was still planning to do, and I realized that I had been writing versions of that same list since I was 42. Different paper, different pens, different handwriting as the years changed my grip, but the same list. Portugal, the painting class, the friend I hadn't called. And then everything changed. Not because of a financial instrument, because of a question. The question was this: what would I do right now, today, if I trusted that the money was already enough? I sat with that question for a long time because it was terrifying, because my whole life had been organized around the idea that there was always more safety to be built before I could act, more cushion to create, more certainty to manufacture. But the question wouldn't leave me alone. And then the health scare arrived, and it hit that question like a spotlight. It was the spring I turned 71. I had a cardiac event, minor in the scheme of things, or so I was told by doctors who were very careful with their language. But I was in a hospital for 4 days, and those 4 days had a way of stripping everything decorative off the facts of my life and showing me the structure underneath. The structure underneath was this: I had a great deal of money, and I had deferred almost all of the living I had planned to do with it, and I was now in a hospital bed at 71, wondering how many good years I had left to use either one. I'm not saying this to be dramatic. I'm saying it because that is exactly what I thought. Lying there with the monitors and the hushed voices and the terrible hospital lighting, which, by the way, is the same quality as corporate fluorescent lighting, and I think that is not an accident. I thought, this is the audit. This is the moment you find out what you actually built. And here's the thing, the money was there. It was real and it was substantial, and I was genuinely grateful for it. But I had not made the one simple decision that would have transformed it from a number in an account into an actual life. I had not decided to use it as a tool for living rather than a monument to discipline. That was the decision, the one simple decision. Not which stocks to pick, not which Medicare supplement plan to choose, though that matters, believe me, I have opinions. Not even when to start drawing Social Security, though I have thoughts on that too. The decision was simpler and harder than any of those. It was the decision to stop treating my own life as a future project and start treating it as the present reality. In the months after I left that hospital, I made a different kind of plan. Not a financial plan, I had those. I made a life plan. And the financial plan became the servant of the life plan instead of the other way around. I went to Portugal. I know that sounds almost comic by now. The Portugal I had mentioned so many times over so many years that it had become a kind of running joke in my own journal. But I went. I was 71, with knees that required careful management, and a cardiologist who made me promise to take it slow. And it was not the trip I would have taken at 45. It wasn't the hike. It was slower and shorter and more carefully managed. And it was real. It was the realest thing I had done in years. I also made some specific financial decisions that I want to be honest with you about, because this video has a title, and the title makes a promise, and I intend to keep it. The decision to actively work with my assets rather than simply preserve them through real estate investment at a conservative, manageable level, through annuity structures that gave me guaranteed income I could actually spend without fear, through very deliberate social security timing decisions that maximized my lifetime benefit. All of those things together created something I had not had for most of my retirement. They created permission, financial permission to live. I'm not a millionaire in the way Wall Street glamorizes it. I'm not a yacht person. But I have enough, fully and genuinely enough, to live with generosity and intention for whatever years I have left. And I made most of that possible not by being clever at 35, but by being brave at 71. Here is what I want to leave you with. The version of retirement we were sold, the one where you defer and discipline and accumulate and then one day flip a switch and live, that version was always a story. A useful story in some ways, but a story. Real retirement, the kind that actually nourishes you, doesn't start when you hit a number. It starts when you make a decision about what the number is for. And you do not need to wait until 71 and a hospital bed to make that decision. That's the part I most wish I could hand back to myself. Not the money, the timing. The courage to decide 10 years earlier that the living was not somewhere waiting at the end of the list. I am 75 years old. My knees still hurt. My cardiologist still gets more of my time than I would prefer. But I have been to Portugal. I have taken the painting class. I called my friend, and she was still there, still herself, still worth calling. And we laughed for an hour on the phone like no time had passed at all, even though 40 years had. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying this because the time you have right now, whatever age you are watching this, is the most valuable asset you will ever hold. More valuable than anything in your 401k. More valuable than the house, the social security check, the carefully balanced portfolio. And unlike the money, you cannot defer it and have it grow. Time only does one thing when you defer it. Make the decision. Not tomorrow, not when the market settles, not when the kids are sorted and the calendar clears. Now. Whatever your version of Portugal is, your version of the phone call you haven't made, the class you haven't joined, the conversation you've been postponing, it is already later than you think. And I say that not as a warning, but as an invitation, because I am living proof that later is not too late. But later is also not forever. There's one more thing I want to say before I let you go, and it's the most practical thing I'll say in this entire conversation. When I talk about the one simple decision, the decision to treat the money as a tool for living rather than a scoreboard, I want you to understand that it also reshaped how I managed the money itself. Because once I made that decision, I stopped managing from fear. And when you stop managing from fear, you make better choices, clearer choices. I stopped hoarding cash in low-yield accounts because I was afraid of the market. I stopped avoiding conversations with financial advisors because those conversations forced me to confront the future I had been avoiding. I started asking different questions, not how do I protect what I have, but how do I make what I have work for the life I actually want to live? And the answers, when I finally asked the right questions, were far more available than I expected. The window I thought had closed, it was still open, narrower than it would have been at 55, but open. You know that. You've always known that. Now do something about it.